Despite multiple delays until 2023 and even titles that remain without release dates, this year has still been great for video games. Classics like Horizon Forbidden West dominated headlines, but even smaller titles like Tunic, NORCO, and Citizen Sleeper have been exceptional experiences. But for every game that showed promise, there have been several disappointments thus far. Let's take a look at 15 such titles here. Diablo Immortal. The day it was announced, nearly everyone expected Diablo Immortal to be a pay-to-win show. The final product somewhat exceeded their wildest expectations with Battle Pass. Premium Battle Pass, Empowered Battle Pass, materials, bundles, cosmetics, anything and everything was for sale. And let's not even get into entire endgame mechanics, like Awakening, only accessible by spending money. The real tragedy is that even if all of that was stripped away, you're left with a middling, dumbed-down clone of Diablo 3 with a terrible UI to boot. Ikai. Endflame's Ikai is a first-person psychological horror game, which seems like a dime a dozen, but the Japanese folklore and lack of combat seemed like a nice twist. Unfortunately, it fails to deliver anything different while its plot holes and antiquated presentation hampered the intrigued premise. The short runtime wouldn't have been an issue, but the game feels like it ends before it ever really gets going. BLACKWIND. The premise of Blowfish Studios' BLACKWIND seemed good enough for a fun hack-and-slash twin-stick shooter. It fails in almost every aspect, whether it's the bland storytelling or exhaustingly repetitive combat. That not counting the unnecessary puzzles, poor controls, bugs, and other annoyances that mar what could have been a decent little action game. Martha is Dead. LKA's psychological horror title, Martha is Dead, promised a murder mystery mixed with tragedy in Italy during World War II. And it does that at an almost painstakingly slow pace where you mull about until the story happens. Then there are the numerous bugs and annoying design decisions, like being unable to interact with objects while dialogue is playing. Instead of a creepy atmosphere, it falls back on jump scares to drive much of the horror. Again, lots of potential, but it falters more than it succeeds. ELEX 2. Remember when ELEX was released? It earned a rightfully middling critical reaction, but developed a cult following? This sequel is more of the same. Right down to the same premise, the same janky combat and terrible AI, and the same drab visuals. Somehow, someway, it improves on almost nothing from the first game. Joining a faction is a mind-numbing chore, the optimization is atrocious, and the characters are lame. Really, the list goes on and on. Trek to Yomi. Flying Wild Hog's side-scrolling cinematic hack-and-slash has looked gorgeous from day one. As amazing as the presentation can be, the combat is a disaster. It's inconsistent with too many difficulty spikes and iffy controls. Even if you can somehow accept it, there's not much variety to the enemies or any of the game-changing mechanics and abilities to be gained. The short playtime turns out to be more of a mercy than a drawback. Roller Champions. Unlike many titles that try way too hard to appear to be hip and cool, Roller Champions looked sleek when it was first announced at E3 2019. It then got delayed. A lot. Eventually, it was released with almost no fanfare, free to play on Xbox, PlayStation, PC, and Nintendo Switch. As approachable as the gameplay seems, it's very bland and repetitive. Game modes and character customizations are similarly lacking, making this yet another forgettable free-to-play experience from the developer. Rune Factory 5. Rune Factory 5 finally had its Western release on the Nintendo Switch, and while enjoyable in some ways, it doesn't quite live up to the high expectations of fans while failing to reach the heights of Rune Factory 4 Special. Much of this is due to the poor performance on Switch, combat issues, other technical hiccups, which developer Hakama has been addressing with patches, and overall its safe direction. Hopefully, the upcoming Steam release will smooth things over in terms of performance. Dolmen. On the surface, Dolmen sounded pretty cool with its action RPG combat, sci-fi cosmic horror themes, and time shenanigans. Unfortunately, it's not quite the highlight that new publishing label Prime Matters was hoping for with its terrible visuals and questionable mechanics. Maybe it'll improve with another dozen updates or so, but when you release a Souls-like combat game that's more janky than challenging, then it may already be too late. CROSSFIREX. Where do we even begin with CROSSFIREX? It sounded like a good idea at first, bringing Smilegate's super popular, but microtransaction-packed multiplayer shooter to Xbox consoles with a campaign by Remedy Entertainment. Of course, the campaign was 2 operations that are simply horrendous. Terrible controls, lackluster enemies, bad AI, boring guns, and the stories just aren't good at all. Dynasty Warriors 9: Empires. Dynasty Warriors 9 was better known as the Dynasty Warriors that not even longtime fans could defend. Dynasty Warriors 9: Empires meant to improve on it, bringing some much-needed complexity to the equation. The open world from its predecessor is now just a stroll mode, which is even more boring. Mission variety is non-existent, while the combat is somehow worse. The less said about the story, the better, because there is no real story. It's a travesty, which is saying something considering how low Dynasty Warriors 9 had sunk. The House of the Dead Remake. Based on the first title in Sega's beloved light gun franchise, the House of the Dead Remake is an ugly way to re-experience the classic. Performance issues plagued the original Switch release, but even on other platforms like PC, it suffers from crashes and poor optimization. The visuals look decent at first, but the overall presentation feels pretty cheap. Even if that doesn't matter, the controls, the very essence of the game, are frustrating beyond measure. If that weren't enough, the original soundtrack is not here. For copyright reasons, sure, but it still sucks. Life is Strange Remastered Collection. I loved Life is Strange and Life is Strange Before the Storm. Remasters with improved visuals? Sign me up. However, the graphical improvements turned out to be pretty minor. The improved character animation was also only for Life is Strange 1. Even worse is that the PC version suffers from bugs, with Before the Storm having numerous glitches and animation issues. While a $40 price tag isn't the worst asking price, it's a ripoff considering how little is improved and how much is made worse, especially when the original versions are still available at affordable prices. Shadow Warrior 3. Shadow Warrior 3 could have been a worthy follow-up, and there's plenty good about it, from the gory combat to the striking environmental design. While it removes the randomly generated levels and loot from Shadow Warrior 2, it does away with the weapon variety and co-op while dumbing down the progression. The story starts out promising but quickly deflates, which isn't helped by the super short runtime. Flying Wild Hog has released a lot of patches for bugs and performance issues while adding new skins, New Game Plus, and more, so there is that. But the core game is just underwhelming. Rainbow Six Extraction. There should be a running count of games that started with the least amount of expectations and yet still disappointed. Rainbow Six Extraction is one, serving as an obvious cash grab of Rainbow Six Siege's limited time event Outbreak. It more or less lifts the operations from Siege with minimal changes, throws in some random objectives and boring level layouts, and replaces all of the tactical thinking with mindless shooting. The fact that it was released and fell off the face of the earth says it all. Did you know? We at GamingBolt upload new videos every day. Stick around, drop a like, subscribe, and let us know what kind of content you'd like to see in the future with a comment below.